Good morning, church. It has been about 4 weeks since I last preached. I had to remember how to do this, but I have been keeping pretty busy this month, as most of you know. Let's see here. Is this working today? Let's try this. There we go. As most of you know, I was gone for about 10 days on vacation with my wife as a celebration of Blythe graduating with her master's degree. Also an early anniversary present because this Thursday we'll have been married for 15 years. We had a fantastic time. Yeah, thank you. It was really all her. She did all the work putting up with me. We had a fantastic time, especially meeting up with her sister in Germany. I'm going to resist the temptation to make this a slideshow of all of our European adventures. But some of you have expressed interest in that, so perhaps some other time. But today I do want to talk a little bit about some of the art that we saw. This is the Musée d'Orsay in Paris. It is a gorgeous museum in an old, elaborate train station where it holds mainly French art from the late 19th century, especially Impressionist and Post-Impressionist works by Monet, Manet, Degas, Cézanne, and a Dutch painter by the name of Vincent van Gogh. A lot of tourists in Paris go to the Louvre, but we did not, because it was just too much. It's like attempting a day trip to Disney World. There's just too much to see. I saw the Louvre when I was in college. I think I spent 3 or 4 hours there. Saw maybe 2% of the museum. So next time, when we can spend a whole week, we'll do that. But Paris has over 60 other world-class art museums, like the Orsay. And that was nearly too much to do, too. We spent several hours there, but we had a late start because we weren't able to get admission tickets until around 11:30 in the morning. But what that meant, though, is that we had the morning available to go see another smaller art museum just across the Seine River in the Tuileries Garden. It's the Musée de l'Orangerie. And I am so glad that we did. Because the museum only takes about an hour or so to go through. It is famously known as the home of 8 large murals of Claude Monet's water lilies. Monet died just a few months before the museum was inaugurated in 1927, so this is one of his final works. And he was able to help the architect design this room the way that he envisioned it, actually 2 rooms. And he insisted on skylights so that they could be seen in their natural light. And we were able to see it at around 9:30 in the morning when it opened. And the morning light was still peering in. These 2 oval rooms have 4 paintings each, which wrap around you like a panorama. Now, I've seen several of Monet's paintings before. I enjoy his work. I've even seen some of his water lilies, which he painted over 250 over the course of 30 years. But I truly was not expecting to be so profoundly moved and emotionally affected as when I walked into this gallery. It surprised me. It caught me off guard. I had goosebumps, and I felt like time was slowing down as I slowly walked around and took in each painting. I can't explain it, but it was an immersive experience. And of course, that's exactly what the artist was hoping to do. And it's one reason why his lilies are blurry. Monet was one of the founders of Impressionism, which moved away from painting realistic still life, portraits in studios, to taking easels outdoors in the plein air, painting not lifelike landscapes, but evocative ones. He didn't just want you to see an image, but to sense an experience. You're not just looking at a water lily garden, but you can imagine yourself there in a living moment, floating in the water. By painting abstractly rather than realistically, Monet was conveying an emotional space, painting what he felt and not just what he saw. But even then, what Monet saw was blurry too. Because by this time in his life, Monet had developed cataracts in his eyes, which clouded his vision and distorted his perception of color. And he deeply lamented his condition, comparing himself to the great composer Beethoven, who went deaf. And he was urged by his friends and colleagues to get cataract surgery, but he feared that it would rob him of his sight entirely. And he eventually did have one removed, but just as he feared, it wasn't entirely successful, and he needed special glasses to see the world correctly. Monet still found beauty in the blurriness, but blurry isn't the way that he wanted to see the world, nor do we. Now, I don't have cataracts, but I do have poor vision. I wear contact lenses, and I can see clearly for most of the day. But I've been having some issues with them lately, probably related to my allergies and my itchy eyes. And so I'll rub my eyes, and they'll come out of place. They'll fall out, or suddenly the world is blurry again, just like when I woke up. It happened to me on Thursday as I was writing the sermon, and Jalen helped me find my contact. Appreciate that. But it also happened in Europe, and I immediately went to a pharmacy, had to look up how to say contact lens solution in German. Couldn't pronounce it, but it's a long word. Because I didn't want to miss out on the beautiful views that we had traveled across the Atlantic Ocean to see. I mean, sure, there is beauty in the blurriness, but I wanted to see the world as it was intended to be seen. I want to see the world the way that God made it to be. We're going to be looking at a story today of Jesus allowing a blind man to do exactly that. Now, in the Gospels, there are at least 4 separate occasions of Jesus giving sight to the blind. And through these acts of compassion, Jesus was teaching us something. I want to look at one of these stories today, found in Mark chapter 8. And it's a little bit of an odd story because the man that Jesus healed, between being blind and having sight, saw the world with blurriness. Begin reading in verse 22 of Mark chapter 8. They came to Bethsaida, and some people brought a blind man and begged Jesus to touch him. He took the blind man by the hand and led him outside of the village. And when he had spit on the man's eyes and put his hands on him, Jesus asked, "Do you see anything?" He looked up and said, I see people. They look like trees walking around. Once more, Jesus put his hands on the man's eyes, and then his eyes were opened. His sight was restored, and he saw everything clearly. Jesus sent him home, saying, "Don't even go into the village." All right, so what's going on here? Okay, this is perhaps the only instance of Jesus' miracles happening in stages. He had to lay his hands on the man twice before he can see clearly. He also healed him with spit, which is an interesting choice. I mean, why couldn't Jesus heal the man in one take? I mean, he certainly could have. It's not like he had a sudden power failure. I mean, later in Mark, he healed a blind man with just a single word, with no spit necessary, to which I'm sure this blind man said, "What?" Well, to understand what's going on here in Mark 8, let's take a step back and consider the context. Mark isn't just telling about this blind man's healing just for the sake of telling it, but he includes it for a very important reason. See, this chapter begins with the miracle of the feeding of the 4,000. This miracle is notable for being a lesser, yet still impressive, repeat of another miracle, the feeding of the 5,000, which occurred 2 chapters earlier in Mark 6. Now, whereas the 5,000 were largely Jews, the feeding of the 4,000 was mostly Gentiles. And this is a story of compassion. And Jesus says so himself. He says, if I have compassion for these people. They've already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. They likely had run out of food that they had packed. There wasn't exactly restaurants back in the day that they could go to. And as Jesus recognized, it was a long way to walk, and some of them wouldn't make it. So what's interesting, though, is that what happens when he asked the disciples to prepare some food for them. Their response is, I don't know, Jesus, we're in the middle of nowhere. Where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? Now, this was a good, very legitimate question. Or at least it would have been if Jesus had not proven, not too long ago, what he could do in a situation just like this. I mean, seriously? It's like the disciples, they just forgot about that particular miracle of the feeding of the 5,000, but Jesus quickly reminds them, just as he did before. He took some loaves of bread and a few small fish, and with that somehow was able to make enough food for everyone to have their fill and to have leftovers. But if forgetful disciples wasn't enough, as soon as the people started to leave, the Pharisees confronted Jesus. And they asked him for a sign from heaven, something to prove that he was actually from God. I'm not exactly sure what they were looking for, but apparently feeding the multitudes, driving out demons, healing the sick, raising the dead, and walking on water didn't qualify enough as signs. No, instead, it seems to me that they were more interested in like a magic show, like bringing down fire from heaven, turning the sky purple. Do something weird, Jesus, to prove that you're really from God. And we read in verse 12 that Jesus sighed deeply. I'm imagining him sitting there like rubbing his temples. I mean, what were they asking for? Can you blame him? The signs were all around the Pharisees, but they just didn't get it. They couldn't see. And so he denied their request and moved on. Jesus entered a boat, crossed to the other side of the Sea of Galilee with his disciples. And it's not a very long ride, but as they were crossing, the disciples realized that they forgot their leftover bread back at the shore, only having a single loaf that was in the boat already. And this sparks a comment from Jesus saying, "Be careful. Watch out for the yeast of the Pharisees and that of Herod." It was a teaching moment, using the idea of bread and of yeast to warn the disciples of the hypocrisy of the Pharisees, which spreads like yeast. Their teachings were dangerous as Herod, who had killed John the Baptist 2 chapters earlier. But what was obviously a metaphor, a parable, the disciples took literally. And they said, you know what? It's because we had got no bread. I mean, Jesus was teaching them again. They just didn't get it. And so in verse 17, we read that aware of their discussion, Jesus asked them, "Why are you talking about having no bread? Do you still not see or understand? Are your hearts hardened? Do you have eyes but fail to see, and ears but fail to hear? And don't you remember? When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketfuls of pieces did you bring up?" 12, they replied. "And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many basketful pieces did you pick up?" And they answered, 7. And he said to them, "Do you still not understand?" They didn't. They didn't understand. Nobody understood. Nobody could see. Everyone, the disciples, the crowds, the Pharisees, were oblivious to what was going on right in front of them. They were blind to the fact that Jesus was the Son of God in the flesh, and that these miracles were signs that were foretold in prophecy long ago. It was right in front of them, but they couldn't see it. They had eyes but failed to see. They were blind, and they needed help. And to this, we enter that story that we read in the beginning. Jesus healed a blind man. He took him outside of the village, rubbed some spit in his eyes, and asked him if he could see. And the man looked up and he opened his eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, he could see people. His vision had miraculously returned, but it wasn't clear. It looked like trees walking around. He couldn't make out the details, seeing them only as shapes and colors. And so Jesus worked again. And it's then that we read that the man formerly blind could now see everything clearly. His eyes were opened by Jesus. But while we have this story of physical blindness being healed, just like with the bread, it was a metaphor, for the real problem is a lot more serious than that, and it is spiritual blindness. It was all around. Unlike physical blindness, this was an epidemic. The signs were all around, but no one could see them. This afflicted not just the enemies of Jesus, but also his closest friends. They had all seen enough to know who Jesus was. They had enough to understand, but it was all blurry to them. It was like they had eyes, but could only see blurry shapes. They witnessed, but could not understand. And this greatly distressed Jesus. And this was more than mere frustration or annoyance. It lingered on his mind and on his heart. He and his disciples continued on their way, but on the road, he stopped them to ask an important question. On the way, he asked them, "Who do people say that I am?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others, one of the prophets." "What about you?" he said. "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter answered, "You are the Messiah." You are the Messiah. There it is, Peter. There's the vision. There is the sight. In that pure, noble, and great confession, Simon Peter got it. He saw Jesus clearly. Through squinting eyes, he could see all that everyone else, for the life of them, could not see, that Jesus was the Christ, the Son of the living God. Some, like the Pharisees, couldn't see that at all. They were totally blind. Others, like the disciples, had partial sight, like the blind man who could see but still couldn't tell the difference between people and trees. The spiritual blindness that afflicted the disciples was that they could see but weren't sure what they were seeing. They had blurry vision. They were confused. And though they wanted to understand, they could not. But Peter got it. And yet, immediately after this, Peter, when he heard Jesus predicting his death and revealing the Messiah's true identity, he pulled Jesus aside and rebuked him, saying, "What are you talking about, Jesus? No way! I won't allow it." That's not the Messiah that Peter was expecting or recognized. But Jesus, in turn, rebuked Peter, harshly telling him, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." And Peter's problem is that he could see, but he couldn't see clearly. He could see that Jesus was the Messiah, but he couldn't see clearly enough to understand what the Messiah came to do, and that this was all part of God's plan of salvation. Peter's vision had already lost its focus. He couldn't see the big picture that was in play. He couldn't see how things could happen to Jesus like this because he was blinded by the things of this world. In time, though, Peter and the others would see everything clear as crystal. It would take time, but soon it would all make sense. That Jesus alone can make the blind see, and fortunately, he is patient, and he does not give up. Jesus alone can open our eyes. Jesus, after he healed that blind man the first time, the man still couldn't see clearly, and so Jesus healed him again. His disciples, even Peter, had trouble seeing Jesus clearly, but Jesus didn't give up on him, but kept working on them, and he kept teaching them until they had their sight. The next several chapters of Mark describe Jesus healing them of their spiritual blindness and deafness. He demonstrates clearly what it means for him to be the Son of God and what it means for them to be his disciples. This is what he's continuing to do with us today. Because people still struggle with spiritual blindness and blurriness. They struggle seeing Jesus for who he truly is. He doesn't make sense all the time. Jesus doesn't always align with our expectations. To some, he was just a man who lived a long time ago and then died. How could that man who was crucified be the Son of God? Others claim to see Christ clearly and to know who he is, but what they're seeing instead is a blurred image of who they want Jesus to be, just like Peter did. And for those of us who have been given our sight, it can be frustrating and saddening. But at one point, weren't we all blind, but now we see? We all need our vision to be restored, but often it is a process. And it can only be done by Jesus. Going back to the orangery, on the floor below the water lilies, they had an exhibition inspired by Monet called Out of Focus that looked at modern art made after 1945 and World War II. Many of the artists used blurriness as an artistic technique to convey how the world itself had lost its clarity in the face of great upheaval and unrest. And we live in that world, a world that is confusing and blurry, full of people squinting to make sense of everything around us. But for us, and for all of us, Jesus is the lens through which we can truly see. We find clarity in the truth that Jesus is Lord. He is the Messiah, the Son of the living God. And by the truth of those words, we can cut through the fog and the fuzziness and the blur to see this world as it truly is, a world in which Christ is King. He is the lens through which we view and understand this life, not by human concerns, but by godly ones. Jesus shows us the world that God created in the way that we're supposed to see it, the way that is seen through the eyes of God himself. And when our eyes are finally opened in such a way, there is no going back to the blurry. For that's the gospel that we are preaching, and the good news we are proclaiming not just with our words, but with our lives. We are doing so with the clarity of Christ. May the world know him and see him clearly, and may we help others to open their eyes to God's presence in our midst. If you're here today and you want to know more about Jesus, we'd love to tell you all about him. We'd love to show him to you. You can be baptized and receive forgiveness of your sins and the gift of the Holy Spirit, which will help you to see God within and around you. And if you're here today and if you're struggling with this present world and the blurriness that we live in, if you need prayer or encouragement, and if God can minister to you through us, let us know, because you are not alone. You can find me or one of our shepherds, one of our Stephen ministers, anyone here. We are with you today. And in all things, may God and God alone receive all glory and honor and praise. Amen.